Hey guys, this is Corey. This is my Good Book Talk, and today I'm going to be talking to you about 3 titles written by author Kate DiCamillo. Because of Winn-Dixie, The Tale of Despereaux, and The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. I'm recommending these books for 4th and 5th graders because they are pretty simple stories, but they can read them independently, and there's a pretty good sense of adventure in each of them. And the common theme is love overcoming adversity. Here goes. Have you ever really wanted to do something but have a hard time getting started? That's exactly what happened to author Kate DiCamillo. When she graduated from college, she decided she wanted to be a writer, but nobody would publish her work until she wrote the book Because of Winn-Dixie. This book earned her a Newbery Honor, which means that this was considered to be one of the best pieces of children's literature in the year 2000. Not bad for your first story. Today, I'm going to talk to you about 3 books that Kate DiCamillo has written. Because of Winn-Dixie, The Tale of Despereaux, and The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. So let's get started. India Opal, here she is 10 years old, and she has just moved to the town of Naomi, Florida. She doesn't have a friend in the world except her daddy, the preacher. And she calls him the preacher because all he does is preach, or think about preaching, or get ready to preach. Her mama left her when she was just a baby. Because of Winn-Dixie tells the story of Opal's first summer in Naomi. Now, Winn-Dixie is a big, ugly dog. I don't have a big dog, but this dog is pretty goofy looking. And she finds him at the local Winn-Dixie, which is a kind of a grocery store. And I want to read to you about the scene where she finds Winn-Dixie. The dog went running over to the manager, wagging his tail and smiling. He stood up on his hind legs. You could tell that all he wanted to do was get face to face with the manager and thank him for the good time he was having in the produce department. But somehow, he ended up knocking the manager over, and the manager must have been having a really bad day because lying there on the floor, right in front of everybody, he started to cry. The dog leaned over him, real concerned, and licked his face. Now, Winn-Dixie is special. He can smile at you so you can see all his teeth, and when you talk to him, you think he might actually understand what you're saying. So, Winn-Dixie was special enough that Opal decided to take him home to meet the preacher. And from that day forward, Opal and Winn-Dixie were inseparable. Now, Winn-Dixie does have one flaw, and the preacher calls it a pathological fear. And that pathological fear does pop up in the story in a couple challenging ways. Because of Winn-Dixie, Opal gets to meet a whole cast of characters in the town of Naomi. She meets Otis, the pet store manager, Miss Fanny Blank, the town librarian, Sweetie Pie, who's 5, and even the town witch. Opal learns in this story that friendship can creep up on you just like a sudden thunderstorm. The next book I want to talk to you about won the Newbery Award, which means it was the best piece of children's literature in the year 2004, and that is The Tale of Despereaux. And I have a friend here who's going to help us talk about this story today. As you can see, my little mouse has a piece of red thread around his neck. And he's got some pretty big ears. And here we have Despereaux, and you can see instead of around his neck now, he's got the red thread around his tummy. So I wonder what happens to him. I'm going to show you a picture of Despereaux in the story to tell you a little bit about him. And here he is. And you can see he's teeny tiny, and he is reading. Now, most mice would eat a book, but Despereaux was not like most mice. He was ridiculously small. His ears were obscenely large. He had been born with his eyes open, and he was sickly. He coughed and sneezed so often he carried a handkerchief in one paw at all times. Achoo! Oh. He ran temperatures, he fainted at loud noises, and most alarming of all, He showed no interest in a things a mouse should show interest in. And Despereaux lives in a castle, and the castle has a princess, and Despereaux loves the princess. The castle also has dungeons, and our next character lives in the dungeon. And this is Roscuro, and he is a rat. And I don't know if you can see, but he has a spoon on his head. And he says, "I will have something beautiful. I am a rat, but I will have something beautiful. I will have a crown of my own." He picked up the spoon. He put it on his head. So it sounds to me like Roscuro might have a plan of his own. And finally, we have Meg. And poor Meg just wants to be a princess, but she works in the castle. And Meg can't seem to do a job right. So finally, the last place they can think of to send her to work is in the dungeon. And we know who lives in the dungeon. These three lives get tangled up together in a story of love, adventure, loyalty, and revenge. But we still haven't figured out what that red thread means. The last story I want to talk to you about, The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, is one of my absolute favorite books ever. Now, I have a friend here to help me with this story, and this is my rabbit. Now, he's not nearly as fancy as Edward, but he's still pretty special. Once upon a time, there was a China rabbit who was loved by a little girl named Aibileen. His name was Edward, and he felt he was the most perfect bunny in the world. DiCamillo describes Edward as a rabbit who has never ceased to be amazed by his fineness, which means he thinks he's pretty fancy. Now, Edward has a pretty cushy life with Aibileen and her family, but he doesn't feel anything but annoyance towards them. Abileen's grandmother, Pellegrina, tells Edward, "You disappoint me." One day, Edward finds out that the family is setting sail to London. Pellegrina tells Aibileen and Edward a story that night about a beautiful princess who, because she doesn't love anybody but herself, was turned into a warthog. Edward's miraculous journey happens on board, where he mistakenly gets thrown into the sea, lost. Once he's rescued, he spends many years traveling. He gets buried in a dump for a long time. He gets picked up by a hobo and travels with the hobos for many years. And here we have a picture of Edward with his hobo Bull who found him. And the caption says, "Edward loved it when Bull sang." So about halfway through the book, we can kind of see through the picture and the caption how Edward is changing. There's some other pictures about what happens to Edward during the story. One person who finds him turns him into a scarecrow to protect her farm. Edward even comforts a girl as she's very sick and dying. So my favorite part of the story is the writing. When DiCamillo writes, you can tell how Edward is feeling and how he is changing. If you want to find out what happens and how Edward's miraculous journey comes to an end, you'll just have to check out the book in our author spotlight in the library. Thanks for watching.